You are listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud, conversations about trauma and healing from two women who are doing the work.
Hey everyone, this is Kandace and Sher with Processing Trauma Out Loud. We're glad to be back today to do part 3 in a little summer series that we're calling a summer chat. Sher, I'm noticing, okay, so we're recording 4 episodes in one day. Now they'll play week by week. For 4 episodes, we are wearing the same clothes, but keep in mind, it's the same day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so... Well, we have gone through 3 episodes now, 2 episodes. We're on our 3rd. Our first episode is just kind of a little bit of an overview of what our summer chat is about. And our second episode looked at a little of my story on where I was 5 years ago. And you asked the question, what have you learned or what did you unlearn? So I shared a little bit about that. So go back and listen if you want to hear more of my story. But today, Sher, I'm excited to get to hear what it was like for you 5 years ago. And what has this healing journey for the last 5 years meant for you? And what are some of the things that you've learned and unlearned?
It's such a big question for me. And I really had to ponder a little bit because, I've been pondering in the ongoing, but to really think back to, June of 2020, that's when we met. And to think back of where was I at that point? And I think you mentioned last week how often or how much work you had done before you got to this point of beginning to work with your coach. And then shortly after that, you started Story Group with us. And I've said many times that I've been doing my work for 30 years. And that almost gives me pause when I think about that it's been 30 years of recognizing that I have a story, recognizing that I have a lot of stuff related to that I wanted healing, and a lot of things that I have done and tried, and books and seminars and therapy and everything has been helpful. I will not say that there's been anything that hasn't been helpful, but nothing that brought me to face my story the way that story work and then meeting with my coach has done for me. And I think, where was I going on 5 years when we met? And I will say, still very much stuck in the pain of my unhealed stories.
Yeah.
Still very much trying to live the life that I wanted, be the person that I wanted to be, but still really struggling with the beliefs that I had about myself, the beliefs that I had about others, lots and lots of baggage that just kept me from being able to have this sense of freedom and fullness of life and love that I really longed for in my life. I think I was still very much stuck in my pain. And I will say that I do believe that the work I had done previously set me up to really help me launch when I came into story work, because I think when I shared my first story, it was literally life-changing for me when people engaged in a way that I had never experienced before. And it just was, it put me on a whole new path that has just brought so much transformation for me.
And Sher, I want to interject this really quick. My hope is that as you're sharing here in the next, for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, that people will hear that it is never too late, and that the courage and the tenacity, like you had this, like, come hell or high water, I am not giving up to obtain what I know is out there for me or what is in here for me.
Yeah.
And your story inspires me, in how you have just never given up. I mean, it's my story too, but to have someone that has done as much work as you have done, you've been a leader, you've led groups, you've had all these things, and yet you are not shrinking back from saying, I still need more help.
I remember when I was in my 30s, and I grew up from the time I was a teenager. I began to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and the Bible became important to me, and I became kind of a student of the Bible. And I remember when I was in my 30s, I came across this verse that said that Jesus came to give us abundant life. And I remember just looking at that verse for a long time thinking, well, He didn't ever give me an abundant life. I have not had an abundant life, but I started to feel like that's a promise. If that's a promise, I want that. And I feel like I've really held on to that my whole life. And there were times when I got little tastes of some growth or some change or some goodness, but never really that point where I could say, I feel like I'm experiencing the goodness of love and freedom and life that I believe that was meant to be for me. And so yeah, I think that really was a driver for me, that I just kept wanting that kind of goodness that I felt was real for me. And so I kept reaching. And I think one of the things that I wanted to experience so much was love. I can remember even as a young child praying that not only that I would be loved, but that I would be able to be loving. I really wanted to love people well. And for some reason, I just always felt like I was a failure, that I was not able to really love people well, but I really wanted to. And I will say that that's one of the things that I have seen so much change for me in the last 5 years is and we talked last time a little bit about just in with your story about moving into this realm of truth and where we become honest and truthful about our stories, about the real hurt, about our real feelings, about our real beliefs. And I think as I became honest and I shared the truth, which just so many times just felt agonizing to me, but that I was loved, like lavishly loved and surrounded with love and care and invitation. And I can say I never once felt like somebody turned their face away with shame or a sense of you're too much or anything like that. Like I just was so loved. And then experiencing that has helped me just love with so much more freedom and abandon, and to where now like I love. Yeah, I love being loved and I love loving. And so just experiencing love has been one of the things that has been so huge for me in this transformational process.
Mm, I love that. And if our listeners go back and listen to our boundaries series, you've learned to be loved and to love with boundaries. And I want to circle back around to something you said early on about this painful feeling of failure that
Mm,
you held in your
yeah.
body. Can
Mhm.
you say a little bit more of like, what did you experience when you felt like you were failing, and how were you failing, or how did you perceive that you were failing when you were loving others? If you
Mm.
have a sense of that.
Yeah, that's a good question and good to ponder. I think maybe at the core, and you talked about this last time, the core being the sense that I am flawed, that I am an inherently flawed human being. And I think because I felt that, I every word that started with unacceptable, unworthy, I believed was true about me. And because I had to hide my story, my wounds, my harm, my what was real about me, I think that I lived my life feeling like I was a fraud.
Mhm.
Now, I would not have been able to articulate that back then. I was not consciously trying to be a fraud, but I think I felt like a fraud deep down inside, because though I had desire to love people and I did offer care to people all through the years of my life, I always had this sense that if people knew the real me, they would turn and run.
Yeah. I want to just pause for a second. I'm seeing your little girl right now because I know your stories, and I just want to see if this resonates with you. When you were asked to do something and you did it the best that you could, and it still wasn't enough, what did that little girl believe about herself?
Yeah, that she was not good enough, that she was not enough, that she was stupid.
Yeah. And then even the anger of not getting the right hammer.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what happens like when we know story, and I'm just seeing your little girl right now feeling like what doesn't matter how hard you try to love, it won't be good enough. And carrying that with you, like your sincere desire to do that. And the truth is, it's always been good enough,
Mm,
but you weren't allowed to believe that.
right.
Of course, there's growth and maturity that
Mhm.
happens
Right.
as we age, but what's that like for you? And you kind of mentioned a little bit like you're showing up knowing that you give really good care and love to people.
Yeah. And that I love to do that. And it's so much a joy. It's beautiful. And beauty is the other thing that I want to talk about here before our time is up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to transition into that if it's okay. But it is beautiful. Like love is beautiful. And I think for me, and we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, but how creativity and being able to express myself artistically and with paint and color and how it's how it just was surprising to me when I was able to do that. And I'm just recognizing how often my life now is drawn toward beauty. Several months ago, I listened to a podcast by Kurt Thompson, and he talked about, I don't remember the name of the series, but the concept was putting ourselves in the path of oncoming beauty.
Mm.
And so week by week, there would be this assignment of like, read this poem and just meditate on this poem, or watch this movie and think about where does beauty show up in this movie. And the movie actually was Shawshank Redemption, which most people would probably say like that's not a movie about beauty. But when I looked at it through that lens, it was just extremely moving how much beauty is actually even in that movie, but how more and more I am finding myself in the path of oncoming beauty. And I'll just share, even this morning as I was journaling, and I always sit right next to the window, and usually I open the window no matter what the temperature, because I want to hear when the birds start to sing. And I was up very early this morning, and it was still dark, very dark out, and the birds were not singing. And all of a sudden I noticed that the birds were singing. So yesterday I heard the first chirp, but today I missed the first chirp. But but it's like I just paused, and it's like it was beautiful. And then a few minutes later, I noticed the color of peach in the sky. And then I started to tune into beauty, and I felt like this slightly cool, because it's not very cold out this morning, but this slightly cool breeze. And I started writing in my journal like all these little tiny, very insignificant, like people would say, well, that's no big deal. But it's like I'm noticing more and more how I am in the path of oncoming beauty, and how I'm not even sure if I could say how, but it's changing my life to recognize that beauty is always all around me. Just
Mhm.
as love, I've come to this realization that I used to think love was so scarce, hard to find, hard to get, hard to taste. And how now I have written in my journal, and I have said it a few times, that I just feel the lavishness of love. And I will add the lavishness of beauty that is surrounding me in creation, in nature, in the world, but in the people that are in my life, in my family, and in my story group people. And just, yeah, it's just transformational for me.
A few things that came up for me. One, we talked about this. When we're trying to survive, we don't notice beauty. Very rarely, if ever. We literally can't take it in. There's, if you want to call, there's so much debris there blocking. Healing trauma is about removing the debris so that we can see and then we can believe, or we start to believe and then we can see. I've seen both, right? Both can happen. And the other thing that's striking me right now, Cher, is this idea that life is passing us by, whether we like it or not. And the mindfulness, intentionality that you pursue and continued growth, continued healing, like your container to hold not only your own pain and beauty and growth, but that of others is just continuing to expand. And I want to say, this is what we can do. We can say, what does it mean to be intentional? Well, I'll hook you up with my friend Sher because she's one of the most intentional people that I know. And I want to say that's where you're at 5 years later is, you were intentional before, but with the new neural pathways that have been created with this new modality of how love gets into the cracks of our trauma, you have just experienced abundant life in a way that you had never had before.
And just the intentionality of creating new neural pathways. Like, I know how to do that now. I know how to create new neural pathways. One of them being imagination. And so even just when we imagine a certain thing, a certain scene or a certain experience, or I know how to create new neural pathways. And I am very intentional about that because I want a brain that knows love and goodness and freedom and is there more often than it's not there.
Yes. Oh, so good. Thank you for sharing what it's been like for you and where you're at in our summer chat little series here today. And let's come back next week and just do a wrap up of, what are some things that we want to remember about this summer, 2024. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great, Kandace.
Okay. Love you so much, friend.
I love you too.
Thank you for listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to suggested resources and social media. Like, subscribe, and follow to keep up with our weekly content. And if you don't mind, take a moment to rate and review us. Your feedback is extremely valuable and contributes to the success of this podcast. One last thing. If you have found this podcast helpful in any way, or if you have questions on how to take the next steps on your healing journey, please reach out to us via email at KandaceSher@gmail.com. That's KandaceSher@gmail.com. Our sound engineer is Jeremiah Jones of Auditory LLC. We welcome you to join us for more conversations soon. Take care.